Hi, Luke. Welcome to BizTalk. It's my great pleasure having me today. How are you?
Very well, thank you. How are you?
Oh, good. Thank you. Thank you so much for coming. So let's start talking about your great idea, which I do like so much.
Thank you. Okay, so I'll quickly tell you where it came from, and then I'll talk to you about the idea. So I work with psychologists to provide mental health advisory services, and everything we try and do is to identify disproportionately challenged groups that often get overlooked. And now recently, I read an interesting paper, and it surveyed over 250 entrepreneurs and found that 72% of them were struggling with their mental health, which for context is actually roughly 50% higher than the average employed population in the US and UK. Now, there's a plethora of reasons as to why that's the case, most of which I'm sure almost everyone that watches this video will be familiar with. And one of the biggest ones is loneliness. But actually, they found in this study that entrepreneurs that are lonely aren't alone because we don't operate in silo. We're very social creatures, but we don't have a community of people like us that we can relate to that have gone through similar challenges. Now, what was really interesting to me is when I began to investigate not just the cause of mental ill health in entrepreneurs, but also the impact, something phenomenal stood out, but not in a good way, of course. And I don't know if you've read or heard of the book, The Founder's Dilemma. And it's all about identifying pitfalls that sink new companies. And the guy is a Harvard business professor, and he had this ginormous data set, right? So it's 20,000 executives, 10,000 founders, 3,200 startups. And he found something that was, I couldn't believe it. And it was that 62% of startups fail for one reason, and it's founders fighting. And I was like, what? And yeah, it's the case. And he said the reason why is because it's so stressful running a startup that people just begin to clash. But what's even more fascinating and such a learning experience for me is that it's when they start fighting. Founders begin to fight immediately after they get funding, which was fascinating. So what happens is there was a big survey by KPMG last year of 167 founders, and it audited their mental health a week before and after they got the first round of funding. And the ones that began to fight, 62%, it was in that week. Now, again, that begs the question, what's happening? And it's that especially if you're a self-funded first-time entrepreneur and you get funding, it's not just an adjustment, but it's the case that before, when essentially your responsibility was to make presentations, now you've actually got to deliver on that. I guess you've got to hire, you've got to build. And it's, you go out celebrating for one evening and then the next day you're like, oh, we've actually got to do this. And that's when founders start to fight and it decimates companies. Now, what's really interesting, perhaps for you, hopefully, is where I got this idea. And it was from you. You said in your webinar that you kindly sent at 40 minutes and 20 seconds to be precise. The thing that scares me, and I'm quoting you verbatim just because I put it in a deck, is founders that walk away and begin to fight because you've seen it happen to you and destroy everything like straight away. So I thought it was interesting. Now, okay, so I was like, what is the root cause of this problem then? What is really, really happening here? As in, why do founders fight to such catastrophic extents? It's because they can't talk about it. And what that means is being an entrepreneur, your brand is that it's going great, you're resilient. The last thing that any founder wants to do is go up to their investor and say, look, I'm really struggling. I might quit. I don't ever have it in me. It's never going to happen. So they suffer in silence. And that's that loneliness point I was talking about at the start. And what happens when you suffer in silence is you get stressed, you become anxious. And as a result, you become extremely defensive, which manifests in aggression. I don't in any way want to compare founders to dogs, but some dogs, if they're scared, they'll bite. It's the same thing. So what is the solution? Well, the solution is to get entrepreneurs talking about mental health. And that is not an easy task. So how can you do that? Well, it needs to be an anonymous environment where people don't feel as though their reputation or company is at risk. So what we've actually done is we've partnered with a very, very successful software company in the UK that's used in the NHS. And what it does is provide anonymous online community support for identified groups of people that we know experience challenges. And what it is that we're going to start doing is approaching investors and saying, would you be interested in providing this service to the people in your portfolio? And the result is that if we can help 50% of the 65% of founders that basically, friendly fire, that could be a big result. So the last thing from me, I guess, if you're a VC with 20 companies, and 65% of them have founders that are fighting, that means that there are 7 companies. That means that 14 of your companies in your portfolio will fight. If you can help 50%, that could be an extra 7 companies that don't fail. That's a 100% improvement as to what it would be before. So that's the plan. But what's interesting is I'm not a VC, and this is your area. You're the expert. And if there's one person out of us 2 that's going to know whether or not this is a good idea, it's not going to be me. So I think I've identified a problem, but I would just love to hear from you as someone that is a VC, and I've spoken to a lot of VCs about this. Chat about that.
Thank you, Luke. I mean, that's a great idea. And I know very well because I've been investing in one company and 12 months all finished because they've been fighting after the day after. And when they fight, it's finished. There is nothing more to do. I mean, you need to start replacing funders. If you want really to replace funders, just shut down the company because you're wasting your time. So I know perfectly how painful it can be. And I do believe entrepreneurs are not only lonely, but they're alone. That's my opinion. And it comes to entrepreneur, it comes to CEO. You can't show your weaknesses. You need to show your strengths, and that's it. So you keep in yourself. I do the same, absolutely. And my sister is a psychologist, and I always tell her, I think I need, because you need to keep everything inside, right? Almost everything, because you can't show off everything. You can't show to your employees that you're weak, because it does work in this way, or I mean, we think does work in this way. So I do agree with your view on mental health in venture capital, and I do agree what venture capitalists ask to a startup is simply too much sometimes, right? I give 1 million, I want back 50 million, I want back 100 million. You need to deliver it, right? So yes, you feel the pressure, of course, because you have to deliver, and you start fighting because everyone is stressed up and they find the space. Yeah, this is how the direction it is. Absolutely, I agree. Absolutely, that's a great idea. And what I want to ask you is, how do you think you can execute it? You have done few survey on the venture capital side, I suppose also on the startup side, but how actually you want to deliver it, and how you want to maybe one day make it working as a business?
So in terms of the next steps, we're going to try and do it very gradually and in a way that minimizes risk for the investor. So the first step is to qualify the need, to partner with an investor that wants to audit his portfolio, just to ask, if we had this support, would you use it? And if the responses came back and they were positive, then we'd run a pilot. We'd say, okay, let's have a small, controlled, initial first implementation, and we can roll it out for a minimum of probably 6 months. And then we will audit not only the changes in well-being as a result of the intervention, but of course also the rates of early entrepreneurial exit within that portfolio and the performance of the company, both on an individual level of the founders that were participating and as a whole. And if it was positive, we'd scale it up. we'd use it as a case study and we'd approach other investors.
And how the action is developed? Are you going to use which tools? How is done exactly properly?
Yeah. So I should say at this point, this organization is a legally separate entity to me. I'm merely someone who can make an introduction. The way they do it is in 3 steps. They say, what's your community and who needs help? And they send you a link. And what happens is how do I say? The provider of the care procures access for the people that they want to support. So let's say it was a VC, the VC buys it for the founders who can use it for free.
Okay. So a VC can use it for all the companies, in this case, startups they have in their portfolio.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, with a case study, probably understanding. And how do you think you can measure the performance? How they can measure the help they can get and how the help is going to be translated in performance, less failures, and so on?
Absolutely. So that's what we do currently as an organization. So we would work with a chartered organizational psychologist with expertise local to entrepreneurship and venture capital or venture funding generally. What we would do is talk with that psychologist about specifically what challenges, psychologically speaking, were local to this group of people. We'd then design a bespoke survey that measured across those different metrics how people were feeling. So how low, that's a bad question. How socially connected do you feel? How often do you consume excessive drugs or alcohol? And so on. Now, those questions would be quantifiably measured on a scale of 1 to 10. What we would then do is we'd have a baseline measurement. Then we'd roll out the solution. And at the end, we would simply send the same survey and we could measure the difference. So we could see what was the impact on well-being from the intervention. And then the VC, because I wouldn't have access to their paperwork probably, in the background would say, okay, now what's our attrition been? What's our performance been? What are the differences? And does it correlate with the amount of time that we're rolling out the solution for?
That's great. What has been the response from VC and startups we have been talking to?
Hasn't been great. I'll be completely honest with you. I've spoken to 6 VCs now. I think 3 of them just said, nah. And I think a couple others have said, it's an interesting idea. I'm not entirely sure how that applies. And I think 1 or 2 others have said, okay, let's explore this. There's something here, but it needs development. Now, it's been really interesting for me because in essence, their response has been, and I'm not making them out to be callous in any way, by the way, it's like, that's not our job, which is true. It's not their job. Their job is to invest in companies and make money. It's not to provide mental health support.
What about, in the VC
But I think in my head, the one thing that confused.
But in the VC community, it's quite trendy now. Start understanding that, entrepreneurs, they need support. They need mental support. I don't want to talk about psychology. I don't want to talk about, of course, but coaching, which is pretty common and normal to everyone, right? Because when we talk about psychology and you go to the psychologist, people think you are almost mad, which is not at all. Okay, there's like very nice and healthy support you can get from people who knows actually how your brain works, right? In somehow. But let's talk about coaching. It's very trendy, coaching. I can't say any problem to have a coach that is coaching and making the founders understanding how to cope with stress, because this is what you need to do. You need to cope with stress every day. It will loneliness because you will feel it. There is nothing to do. I feel it every day. With or without pandemic. I've been feeling this since I started being an entrepreneur, and I think I will die in this way probably. But I can't see any problem. So I find it quite trending. A lot of VC, the understanding. Let's talk more generally investors. they do understand that, the entrepreneurs are humans. Humans need help. Full stop. So, so I'm surprised the one you talked to, probably they have been rejecting a proposal, but I do believe if you have a more deep talks with probably 6 months, maybe you need to talk to 100, we find about 10-20% of them actually say we can actually try. Not all portfolio, maybe have a case study and try to understand if helping can be a good stuff or not. I mean, I'm finished to write my VC, or we start raising the funds next year. And in my team, I want a psychologist. Full stop. It has to be there for any help, because it is what it is. I mean, you need to be strong enough. And coaching is popular everywhere. In football, coaching is absolutely every day, because you can't high perform because you're human. And every day you have some problem will come in your brain and will bring you down. There is nothing to do. This happens to me every day, happens to everyone, because we're humans. So I do believe if you can move forward talking to more investors and more startups, I think you'll find a way.
For sure. I agree completely. And you may have seen already, but I, in my pitch deck, have 6 examples of different VCs that have implemented in the past year, when this conversation started happening off the back of COVID, different mental health initiatives. So you have people like Alpha Ventures that are creating support groups for entrepreneurs. You have Felicity Ventures that are putting 1% of all revenues generated back into founder mental health. You have Builders Investors that are subsidizing therapy. You have a few others that I can't remember the name of that are paying for therapy. It's amazing. It's happening. In answer to your question, or rather statement, I'm surprised it hasn't gained traction, because coaching is really popular. I would say you're right. Coaching is really popular, but coaching, I don't believe, will solve the problem, because the root cause of why founders fight and startups crumble is because founders can't talk openly about their mental health in a community. Now, there's a study called Seeking Support and Mutual Aid for Entrepreneurs that came out in 2019. It looked at 2,833 surveyed founders to ask simply 2 questions. It was, if there was a mutual aid group for you to talk about the struggles local to being an entrepreneur, would you participate? And would it be helpful? And I mean, like, the overwhelming response was yes and yes. And it's because coaching is great, but coaching is a proactive approach to build someone's resilience and move forward and learn key skills in the domain that you're operating. Yeah. Mental health support that's community-based, it's reactive.
I agree. Let's say you can move forward. What's going to be your next step after a successful case study, 6 months case study?
What I plan to do is actually build a platform with multiple digital mental health care solutions that we could offer out, not just to investors, but to other groups that struggle disproportionately too. This solution would be best for entrepreneurs because what they need is an anonymous support community. But for other people, maybe they need CBT or, digital access to digital therapy. So we're doing another project with amputees at the moment, and we're also exploring another project with cancer patients on radiotherapy. So.
And it's going to be for free, no profit, or you think one day you can charge you something?
Well, at the moment, what we're doing is we're making introductions. So the value that we're bringing as an intermediary is working with psychologists, doing that research to identify those groups that are most often overlooked, or they are recognized, but they don't get the support they need. So we're providing the research, we're reaching out to the relevant vendors and providers that can support, and we're making the introductions. So I think, yeah, we would take a referral fee there, which is how we'd make income, and they would pay directly to the people that we put them in contact with.
And what about the day if you have your platform, you run your proper platform, okay? Without being between, yes, of course you are in between platform, by definition is in between, but how really is your approach to investors, and how you think you can get on board investors, startups, and also other kind of people, because not only investor startup needs this.
Yeah, I would say quite simply, as is the case with the research I've done into the problem I just mentioned, we know there's a problem. That's clear. And we understand that problem by identifying it in credible, published academic reports that are available to anyone. They're unbiased, they didn't come from a vendor. And we think we know how to solve it. We could be wrong, as I could be wrong with the problem we're talking about easily. But should we give it a go? That's going to be the approach.
Absolutely. I mean, taking away the attention to VC, because it's not all about VC startups, where do you think you can bring your idea outside the venture capital environment?
Well, the first one is prosthetics. We're having a very interesting conversation with a big US-based prosthetics company at the moment. And yeah, it's really exciting. So one of the things that we're thinking about doing, the long-term vision, is actually to branch this out to people who suffer disabilities more generally. With amputees, it was fascinating again. I watched 22-hour-long interviews making notes, and they all said the same thing. I was struggling to accept myself when I lost a leg. And then I met someone else who was the same, who was confident and funny. And it was like they gave me permission to accept myself and move forward in life. It was amazing. Now, that's amputees. They really struggle with body image specifically, actually more so than mobility, which is interesting. With cancer patients, they struggle with feelings of social disconnection. So we'd actually look at other disabled or challenged groups, and we go there. With VCs, it wouldn't just be about founders. We know that 52% of CEOs struggle with their mental health.
Of course.
And it's so hard, so we go that way. And then with things like hospitals and healthcare that we're exploring, we try and start in the private sector, most likely in the States, with a specific group like cancer patients, and then we'd branch it out, maybe one day even into the public sector in the UK. So we'd sort of tree in all different areas.
I mean, where do you see these use of, actually no, how do you see the way how we can open ourselves one day? Because this problem comes because we are all very close. I mean, we can't show weakness. This is not only VCs, not only venture capital, it's everyone. We are humans, and we do believe if we show weakness, we are weak. Actually, probably is the opposite. But do you think something like your idea and developing more bigger scale can help people one day and accepting themselves, accepting who they are, and open up themselves to the world? Probably they will live better.
Yeah, I actually had this exact conversation this morning, so I'll send the video to him. But we spoke about this. How do you actually destigmatize the topic of mental health in high-octane, performance-based environments populated almost entirely by immensely driven and often very successful people?
Yeah,
it's a big challenge. And he said something that I haven't thought about, but seems self-evidently true. So you need to start doing it. And what he meant by that is you can't just talk about destigmatizing mental health and talking about mental health. It's not going to make, let's take founders as an example, 100 founders say, oh, you don't know if you're cut out for this either. Me neither. It's not going to happen. What you need to do is implement a solution that they can actually engage with. So the question is, what is that? And why would a founder engage? A founder would engage because it's relevant to them and it's specific to their needs, which is why we work with psychologists to identify them. So that's how you do it. That's how you open up the conversation. Because if everybody's actively talking about mental health and seeking help, the dialogue is going to happen.
Yeah, we're more talk than acting. That's the point. We should start talking and be a little bit more open, and I can put myself inside without any problem. But yeah, that's a big need, and somehow we need to open it up. How now, Jörn, you started your new, let's say, venture. You have your idea, okay? You have your vision of your idea. What's going to be? How is going to be your vision? How do you think you can see this moving forward in terms of not only executing, but where do you see this can develop?
What this is fundamentally, if it managed to gain traction, is actually more of a social campaign than it is a business venture. Because like we just said, the only way to actually kickstart a conversation about mental health is to have people participate within the narrative of mental health. If we can make this big enough, it's going to make different people across different sectors doing different things actually open to the idea of talking about mental health. So the ultimate end goal, the vision, and it's why I started, is to get everybody, regardless of who they are, what they're going through, to actually find it okay, to be honest about not being okay.
Are you searching any funding to move forward?
At this stage?
Yeah.
Not directly. Within a couple of months, perhaps, because what we might think about doing, and actually I was looking at some of the people in, well, not your portfolio, but on your EquityMatch, that are using matching algorithms to pair people who experience similar problems that would have a productive conversation. So one of the things that we're thinking about doing is trying to develop something proprietary which might be able to facilitate a similar functionality, but perhaps not to exactly the same extent, but for communities instead of for individuals. And then we'll be looking for funding.
I have my opinion on this kind of topic. I do believe the day when we will cross the line is when we do not be anonymous anymore. Until we be anonymous, we are not destigmatizing this problem. We are still there, absolutely, because you need to cover yourself, right? Because you're ashamed of yourself. That's the reality. So I do believe what you're doing, and hope other people will do, one day will remove this stigma, right? Be not normal. And you can actually say, you know what, that's who I am, and this is my name and my surname, right? I don't need to be covered. I don't need an avatar to talk to you. And yeah, I mean, let me thank you again, Luke, for coming to BizTalk. I do believe what you're doing is great, not only for the venture capitalists, not only for the startup, man, that's for the community as a whole. Thank you so much, and I do hope you can have a great success. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.